strange week coming up. We start where we are today, but we don't end up there. So will you pray with me? God, it is so easy to get caught up in the cheers of the crowd. It's not so easy to stick around for the tears and agony. Teach us the way to be soul friends to each other. Show us how to be present for each other in the way you are present to us. Amen. As Sophia used to say, picture this. Jerusalem, Passover week. Suddenly there is a parade. We're all running to see what is happening. People are shouting, Hosanna, blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. They're waving palms and throwing their coats on the ground. We watch and wait, and there he is. He's not much to look at, just a common man. But there's definitely something about him. People are beside themselves. The crowd is growing with hysteria, and I'm getting out of here while I can. We can all get that caught up in this story. Why, here in the villages, there are parades for every imaginable holiday, and people get pretty caught up in them, no matter how silly they might seem to the people who weren't there. People love parades. And the folks in Jerusalem that day were no different. I'll bet even some of you, if you're honest, felt a little rise in excitement as our own choir processed, waving their palms and singing, God has made me glad. We love to rejoice. It lifts our spirits, makes us feel good, and brings us closer to each other as we celebrate together. But this week does not end with a parade. And we must travel on with Jesus after he dismounts from the donkey and walks almost unnoticed around Jerusalem. There is no real agreement about what Jesus did from the time of the parade to the time of the so-called Last Supper. Each of the gospel writers tell a different story. It would appear that he continued what he had been doing all along, teaching to whomever was present to listen. Only this time, he did it in Jerusalem. Jesus is upping the ante. It may be that this is when he overturned the tables of the money changers in the temple. He certainly continued to heal people and the crowds gathered. It became impossible for the powers that be to ignore what this man from Galilee was doing right under their noses. The disciples also continued to be with Jesus, spending time with him and learning from him. Before you know it, it is the eve and the Passover meal. Again, we can imagine a somewhat rowdy crowd of rough and tumble men and women still completely unaware of what lies ahead. They quiet during the supper when Jesus says those strange things about bread and wine. And then comes the prediction of the betrayal with the self-questioning. Judas is sent to do the deed. And Peter is warned that he will himself betray Jesus during the trial that is to come. And in one of the most misleading sentences in the Bible, it says, and they sing a song and go out, as if that is all that is going to happen. Jesus takes, though, the disciples with him to the Garden of Gethsemane. All he asks is that they stay awake with him while he prays. He does not ask for them to come up with fancy prayers. He does not ask for them to stand over him and lay hands on him as he prays. He just says, stay awake. see if his friends are standing watch in prayer for him, and 3 times he finds them sleeping soundly. He bears his agony alone, when even his best friends cannot stay awake after a good meal to be with him. There is so much to focus on in the hours that follow, but today I want to focus on what Jesus was asking from his disciples, their presence with him during his sobbing, pleading, hard time. I want to suggest that we might call that gift, the gift that Jesus failed to receive at his neediest point, the gift of presence. It's a gift we can and all do give, but it's not always easy. Like many of you, I was an extremely lonely adolescent. Nobody, and I mean nobody, wanted to listen to me whine one more time. Nobody likes me. I don't fit in anywhere. When I was about 14, I happened onto a book by Taylor Caldwell. She was very popular back then. And it was called The Listener. It wasn't written for kids, so I must have snuck in and lifted it from my mother's books. I don't remember the whole premise, but I remember that a man, after his wife died, built a monument to her. Across the top of the monument it said, "The man who listens." And he sat in the monument day after day. People could come in and talk to him, though he sat behind a veil and was unknown to most of them. The story itself follows several people whose lives were completely changed because of his listening presence. People who were suicidal, bankrupt, broken-hearted, all had their lives changed. And somewhere, somehow, a lonely adolescent hung on to the hope that somewhere, someday, there would be someone who would listen to her pain. And of course, eventually there was, or I would not be here today. When I hear of our LGBT young people dying at their own hands, all I can think of is that no one was there to listen. That book, though I did not realize it until recently, played a huge role in my wanting to become a minister, to be a person who could be counted on to listen. Why does the gift of presence seem so hard? It would seem that Jesus did not ask much of his disciples, just stay with me. Most of the time when people come to see me, all they want is for me to listen. Really listen. We are a multitasking, make everything better, rush to the next job world. And the gift of presence requires us to change every one of those orientations. When our friends ask us to listen, I can guarantee you that they need our full attention. And more than likely, they are not asking us to fix whatever is going on for them. Unless we have worked on increasing our sensitivity to the need of people to be listened to and our own need to dispense answers, we will rush in with advice. We don't do well with the feeling of being unable to help. Perhaps it is also because of our need to move on to our next task of the day or hour. The gift of presence is pure love. By giving the gift of presence, we are allowing the love of the universe, indeed the love of God, to flow through us and flood the other person with peace. The Celtic tradition speaks of soul friends, people to whom we can completely unburden our hearts and souls and know that without a doubt they will sit quietly and For many of us, it requires great discipline to remain focused on what this one person is saying. But the gift that you are giving to another is well worth the price of practice. I find that the more I am able to sit in God's presence quietly, the more I am able to sit with complete focus on another. This single focus calls us to hear and experience pain, conflict, suffering. But God, the very source of this love, will guide you through in your growth. This soul friend, this anamkara, provides the place where we can be completely understood. To be understood is to be loved. John O'Donoghue, Celtic post priest, said, "To be understood is to be home." There is no greater feeling than to come home and know that you are there, at home, at peace. There is much sadness in this world, no matter what the advertisements say about living and retiring in Florida. We don't shovel snow like our northern friends, but we suffer the same losses and grief, the same disappointments and estrangements, and the same need to be understood. What an opportunity we have to give this completely free gift to others. This is what Jesus needed from his friends on this night of great suffering. They failed him. Perhaps because they were still completely unaware of what was happening. Perhaps because they could not face the pain of seeing Jesus as he was that night. No matter the cause, the lesson is that there is no need for us to ever fail those whom God has placed in our lives in the same way as the disciples failed Jesus. When we provide for others this coming home experience, when we know this profound desire to listen with full attention, we are standing on sacred ground. This sacred ground is ours for the experiencing by our steadfast attention, to being present to all who come into our presence. This sacred ground, the same as when we come fully into the presence of God, is where we are church. And where we are church, we are